The first time I realized my husband was building a life without me, I was sitting alone at our kitchen table at 2 in the morning, staring at a bank statement that had my name on it. There were 12 transactions. 12 payments I had never authorized. 12 payments made to the same woman. The total was $38,740. I remember staring at that number for so long that the digits began to blur. I thought there had to be an explanation. There had to be some mistake. Because my husband, Daniel, had spent the last 3 years telling me that every dollar we had was being saved for our future. He had told me we couldn't afford vacations. We couldn't replace the old car. We couldn't renovate the kitchen. We couldn't even think about having the comfortable life we'd once dreamed about. And I believed him. Because 3 years earlier, I had walked away from a career I had spent 15 years building, because Daniel told me he needed me. I thought I was giving up my career for my marriage. I didn't know I was giving up my career so my husband could afford another woman's life. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our videos. Because if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand why the final thing I discovered was far more devastating than the money. Daniel hadn't simply been cheating on me. He had been preparing for a future, and I wasn't in it. My name is Claire. For 15 years, my career was the one thing in my life that had always belonged completely to me. I had started at the bottom of a financial consulting company when I was 24. I worked late nights, learned everything I could, and eventually became one of the senior consultants in the firm. By the time I was 39, I was earning more than I had ever imagined I would. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable. I had savings. I had investments. I had retirement contributions. And, most importantly, I had independence. Then I met Daniel. He was charming in a quiet way. He wasn't the loudest man in a room, and he didn't need to be. He listened. He remembered small things. He knew when I was tired before I said anything. When we started dating, he made me feel like I had finally found someone who understood what partnership meant. Daniel wasn't threatened by my career. At least, that's what I thought. He used to tell people he was proud of me. He would tell his friends that his wife was the smartest woman he'd ever met. And whenever I talked about a promotion, he celebrated with me. So when Daniel decided he wanted to start his own consulting business, I supported him. It was risky. He knew that. I knew that. But I believed in him. I told him that sometimes one person had to carry more weight while the other was building something. He smiled and kissed my forehead. "You'll never regret believing in me," he said. I remembered those words for years. I just didn't realize how differently they would sound later. The decision didn't happen overnight. We discussed it for weeks. Daniel told me that if I reduced our expenses, stopped working temporarily, and helped him manage the home while he focused entirely on the business, he could turn things around. He promised it would only be temporary. 6 months. Maybe a year. Then I would return to work. I had reservations. But Daniel made the sacrifice sound romantic. He said we were investing in our marriage. He said there would come a day when we'd look back and laugh about how difficult those years had been. He said, "One day, Claire, we're going to sit in our dream house and remember that we built it together." I wanted that life, so I resigned. My coworkers were shocked. Some asked whether I was certain. One of my closest friends, Melissa, asked me privately if I had thought about what would happen if Daniel's business failed. I told her I wasn't worried. I told her Daniel and I were a team. I believed that. The day I cleared my desk, I cried in my car. Not because I regretted leaving, because I was excited. I thought I was beginning a new chapter. Instead, I was closing the chapter of my independence without realizing it. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. I managed the house. I cooked. I handled appointments. I helped Daniel organize his business records. I answered emails when he was overwhelmed. And because I had savings, I covered more of our household expenses. Daniel always thanked me. He would wrap his arms around me and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Those words made me feel needed. So I kept giving. First, it was household expenses. Then it was money for the business. Then it was money to help him purchase equipment. Then it was money for a new office. Every time I transferred money, Daniel promised me it was temporary. He kept saying the business was almost there. I believed him. Because I had already given up my career. Admitting that I might have made a terrible decision would have meant confronting something I wasn't ready to face. So I gave more, and more, and more. By the second year, our financial situation looked strange. Daniel's business was supposedly growing. But somehow, we were always struggling. Every time I asked where the money was going, he had an explanation. Taxes, business expenses, outstanding invoices, equipment, clients who hadn't paid. I didn't question him too much because I trusted him. And because I wasn't working anymore, I became increasingly dependent on the information he gave me. He controlled most of the business finances. I had access to our household account, but Daniel handled the business accounts. Whenever I asked him about the company's finances, he said he didn't want to burden me with details. I accepted that. I shouldn't have. There were small things that started bothering me. Daniel began keeping his phone face down. He started taking calls outside. Sometimes, when I entered the room, he would stop typing. Once, I asked him who he was talking to. He said it was a client. Another time, I saw a woman's name appear on his screen. Rachel? I asked him about her. He laughed. She's one of the consultants helping me with a project. I believed him. Rachel became a name I heard occasionally. Nothing about her seemed suspicious. At least, not then. Daniel mentioned that she was good with marketing. He said she was helping his company attract new clients. Sometimes he'd say she was difficult. Other times he'd praise her work. I never met her. That should have been strange. But I didn't think much about it. My entire life had become centered around supporting Daniel. I was so busy trying to make his life easier that I stopped paying attention to what he was doing when I wasn't looking. The first serious warning came on a Tuesday morning. Daniel had left his laptop open on the dining table. He normally never did that. I wasn't looking for anything. I was searching for a recipe on my phone when I noticed a notification on his computer. It was from a bank. I saw the first few words. Payment scheduled. I didn't think anything of it. Then I saw the amount. $4,500. I froze. The payment was going to an account with a woman's name attached to it. Rachel Morgan. I stared at the screen. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe properly. Then I heard the front door. Daniel had forgotten his wallet. He walked into the kitchen and saw me standing beside his laptop. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. What's wrong? He asked. I pointed at the screen. Who's Rachel? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, she's working on a project. Why are you sending her $4,500? He sighed. It's a business expense. I looked at him. $4,500? Claire, you don't understand how business works. That sentence stayed with me. Because suddenly, I realized something. The woman who had given up her career to help her husband's business was being told she didn't understand the business. I asked him to explain. He became irritated. He said I was making something out of nothing. He told me Rachel had helped secure a major client and that the payment was legitimate. I wanted to believe him. So I did. At least for another few weeks. 3 weeks later, I received an alert from our savings account. Another transfer. $2,800. Again, Rachel Morgan. This time, I called Daniel. He sounded annoyed. Why are you monitoring every transaction? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is our money. He said it was business-related. I reminded him that the account wasn't a business account. There was silence. Then he told me he would explain everything when he got home. That evening, Daniel came home with flowers. He apologized. He told me he had been under tremendous pressure. He said Rachel was temporarily helping him with a client account. He said the transfers were reimbursements. He kissed me. He held me. And then he told me that everything he was doing was for us. For us, he said. I wanted those words to be true. So I let the matter go. But something had changed. I began watching. Not spying. Watching. And once I started paying attention, I couldn't stop noticing things. Daniel began coming home later. He started wearing cologne to meetings he had never cared about before. He bought new shirts. He became protective of his phone. And then there was the money. It kept disappearing. $1,700. $3,200. $2,400. $5,000. Always to Rachel. Always with an explanation. But the explanations were beginning to sound less convincing. One afternoon, I decided to search for Rachel. I found her professional profile online. She wasn't just a consultant. She was 34. She lived in our city. She owned a small marketing company. And there was a photograph of her with Daniel. They were standing at a business event. The picture had been taken 6 months earlier. Daniel had his hand on her back. They were smiling. I stared at that photograph for a long time. I didn't accuse him. I didn't call him. Instead, I started looking at the dates of the payments. Then I noticed something. Every time Daniel told me he was traveling for business, there was a payment to Rachel. Every time he said he was meeting a client, there was a payment. Every time he told me he had a late meeting, Rachel's name appeared somewhere in the financial records. My hands began shaking. I went through the statements again. The transfers weren't random. They were a pattern. And then I found something that made my stomach drop. A payment for an apartment. Rachel's apartment. The description said housing. I read it again. Then again. Daniel wasn't simply paying Rachel for business. He was paying her rent. I waited until Daniel left for work. Then I looked through the financial documents. I found the address. It was 20 minutes from our house. I drove there. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe a mistake. Maybe another explanation. But when I arrived, I saw Daniel's car parked outside. I sat in my car across the street. For almost an hour. Then Rachel walked out. She wasn't alone. Daniel followed her. He kissed her. Not the kind of kiss a man gives a business associate. Not a friendly kiss. A husband's kiss. A lover's kiss. I watched the man I had married put his arms around another woman. And something inside me went completely still. There was no screaming, no crying, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The late nights, the phone, the money, the excuses, the business trips, the new clothes, the apartment. Rachel wasn't helping his business. She was his other life. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for nearly an hour. Then I walked into the house. I looked around at everything I had sacrificed for. The kitchen I had kept spotless. The photographs. The furniture. The home Daniel said we were building together. And I realized that while I had been protecting our home, he had been building another one. That night, I didn't confront Daniel. Instead, I opened every financial statement I could access. I started from the beginning. 3 years. I went back 3 years. The first payment to Rachel had happened only 4 months after I left my job. I stopped. I checked the date. It was exactly 3 weeks after my final paycheck. I kept scrolling. More payments. Hundreds. Thousands. Some were labeled as consulting. Some as reimbursements. Some had no explanation. Then I found the largest transfers. $8,000. $6,500. $9,200. $7,000. I added them together. The total was staggering. Over 3 years, Daniel had transferred more than $38,000 to Rachel. And then I found another account. A separate savings account. My name wasn't on it. But Daniel's was. And the money going into it was coming from our household account. I looked at the balance. $84,600. I stared at the screen. $84,600. Where had that money come from? Then I found the account history. It had been opened 2 years earlier. The deposits were regular. Monthly. Some were small. Some were enormous. And almost every deposit had come from money I had earned before leaving my career. My money. The savings I thought were being used to support our future. Daniel had been moving it. Quietly. Systematically. For years. I finally understood why we were always struggling. We weren't struggling. He was moving our money somewhere else. The next morning, I called my old employer. I hadn't spoken to my former supervisor in almost 3 years. When she answered, she sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. We talked for several minutes. Then I asked a question. Is there any chance my old position is available? There was silence. Then she said something I will never forget. We've been hoping you'd come back. I started crying. Not because I had lost everything, because I realized I hadn't lost everything. I had left my career. I hadn't lost the woman I was. She was still there. I just hadn't seen her in a long time. My former supervisor offered me a position. It wasn't exactly the same one, but it was close. And the salary was excellent. I accepted. I didn't tell Daniel. For the first time in years, I made a decision without asking what he needed. And that felt strange, but it also felt like breathing after being underwater. Daniel came home that Friday, expecting an ordinary evening. He walked into the kitchen and saw me sitting at the table. There were printed bank statements in front of me. He stopped. What is this? I looked at him. Your life. He didn't understand. I pushed the first statement toward him. Rachel's name was highlighted. Then another. Then another. He looked at the papers. His face changed. Claire. Don't. He sat down. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I asked him how long. He said it wasn't what I thought. I asked him again. How long? He finally admitted it. The affair had started 2 years earlier. 2 years. He had been sleeping with Rachel while I was at home, believing I was helping him build our future. I asked him why. He said he felt lonely. I almost laughed. Lonely. I had given up my career for him. I had stayed home. I had supported his business. I had given him my savings. And he said he was lonely. Then I asked the question that mattered. How much of our money did you give her? He said he didn't know. I placed the statement on the table. Try again. He looked down. Then he admitted it was more than $40,000. I told him it was more than that. He looked shocked. I told him about the separate account. His face went pale. How did you find that? I stared at him. That was when I knew. He wasn't sorry that I had been hurt. He was shocked that I had discovered the account. I asked him about the $84,600. He said it was savings. I asked whose savings. He said ours. Then I asked why my name wasn't on the account. He had no answer. I asked what he planned to do with it. Again. Then he said something that changed the entire confrontation. I was going to use it to start over. I looked at him. Start over with who? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I knew. Rachel. He had been building an escape plan. The apartment. The money. The separate account. The new life. Everything suddenly became clear. Daniel hadn't simply been cheating. He had been preparing to leave, and my sacrifice had funded his exit. I asked him whether he ever intended to come back to me. He said he didn't know. That answer hurt more than anything. Because it meant that for years, while I was fighting for our marriage, he had been deciding whether I was still useful to him. I stood up. Daniel started crying. He said he was sorry. He said he loved me. He said he had made mistakes, but I couldn't hear love in his words anymore. I heard fear. Fear of losing the house. Fear of losing the money. Fear of losing the comfortable life I had helped create. And for the first time, I understood something. Sometimes a person can say, I love you, while treating you like an investment. I thought the story was over. It wasn't. 2 days later, Rachel contacted me. I almost ignored her. Then she sent me a message. I think you deserve to know the truth. I didn't respond. She sent another. Daniel lied to me too. That caught my attention. We agreed to meet in a public place. When I saw her, I expected arrogance. Instead, she looked exhausted. She told me Daniel had said our marriage was already over. He told her I knew about their relationship. He told her I had agreed to the separation. He told her we were only living together because of financial arrangements. I stared at her. He had told her I knew. She told me he had promised they would eventually live together. The apartment was supposed to be theirs. The savings were supposed to help them start their life. I asked her whether she knew the money was mine. She said she believed it was his business money. Then she told me something else. Daniel had been telling her that my career had ended because I wasn't capable of returning. I closed my eyes. That was the moment I understood how deeply he had rewritten my life. He had told another woman that I was weak. He had told me I was necessary. He had told each of us whatever he needed us to believe. Rachel showed me photographs, messages, plans. There were conversations about furniture for the apartment, trips, restaurants, even a discussion about what kind of house they would eventually buy. I didn't cry. I didn't feel jealous. I felt free, because I finally had proof that the future Daniel had promised me had never been real. The following week, I met with an attorney. I gathered every financial record, every transfer, every statement, every message, every document. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wanted my life back. Daniel tried everything. He apologized. He begged. He promised to end things with Rachel. Then he blamed her. Then he blamed himself. Then he blamed me. He said I had become distant after leaving my career. I asked him who had asked me to leave it. He said he thought it was what I wanted. I reminded him of every conversation we'd had. He stopped answering. Eventually, the excuses ended. The legal process was painful. There were meetings, documents, arguments, numbers. There were nights when I questioned everything. I wondered whether I should have noticed earlier, whether I should have kept working, whether I had been foolish. But my attorney said something that helped me. You trusted your husband. Trusting someone isn't the crime. I held on to that, because Daniel wanted me to believe that my love had made me weak. It hadn't. His dishonesty had been his choice. My sacrifice wasn't shameful. I had sacrificed because I loved someone. The shame belonged to the person who accepted that love and used it against me. 3 months after I left Daniel, I walked back into my old office. My first day was terrifying. I had spent years believing I was behind everyone else, but within weeks, I remembered who I was. I remembered how good I was at my job. I remembered why I had loved it. My confidence returned slowly, then quickly, and something unexpected happened. My old supervisor offered me a leadership position. I accepted. The first paycheck felt different, not because of the amount, because every dollar belonged to me. I bought myself a new laptop. I replaced the old furniture Daniel had always said we couldn't afford. I started saving again. And one Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and realized something. The same kitchen where I had discovered Daniel's betrayal had become the place where I planned my new life. I wasn't rebuilding. I was beginning again. Eventually, Daniel moved out. Rachel ended their relationship. Not because of me, because she realized that the man she thought she knew had lied to her too. The apartment was gone. The separate account was dealt with legally. The money he had taken became part of the financial battle that followed. And the house remained mine. For a while, I couldn't decide whether I wanted to stay. Every room reminded me of Daniel. Then, I realized something. The memories didn't belong to him. They belonged to me too. So I changed the house. I painted the walls. I replaced the furniture. I turned the small room Daniel had used as an office into my own workspace. And above my desk, I hung one photograph. It was a photograph of me from the day I graduated. Young, confident, smiling. The woman I had been before marriage. The woman I had forgotten. I wanted to see her every morning. Not because I wanted to go back, because I wanted to remember that she had never disappeared. About 6 months after the separation, Daniel asked to see me. I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant. He looked different. Older. Tired. He told me he had lost his business. He told me Rachel had left. He told me he regretted everything. Then he said something I had once dreamed of hearing. I finally understand what you did for me. I looked at him. He said he hadn't appreciated my sacrifice. He said he had taken my love for granted. He said if he could go back, he would do everything differently. I believed that he regretted what happened, but I no longer needed his regret. He asked whether there was any chance we could reconcile. I thought about the woman who had sat at that kitchen table at 2 in the morning. The woman who had stared at $40,000 of payments to another woman. The woman who had believed she wasn't enough. Then I looked at Daniel, and I realized I didn't miss him. I missed who I thought he was. There is a difference. I told him I forgave him. He looked surprised. Then I told him forgiveness didn't mean returning. It meant I was no longer carrying him with me. He started crying. I didn't. I stood up, and I walked away. For a long time, I believed the biggest betrayal was the affair. It wasn't. The affair was painful. The money was devastating. The lies were unforgivable. But the deepest wound came from realizing that I had slowly abandoned myself while trying to build a life with someone else. I stopped asking what I wanted. I stopped pursuing my dreams. I stopped protecting my independence. I convinced myself that sacrifice was proof of love. But love should never require you to disappear. Supporting your partner is beautiful. Building together is beautiful. Making sacrifices for someone you love can be beautiful. But sacrifice should never become a one-way transaction where one person gives everything and the other person quietly takes. I thought I had lost 3 years of my career. I hadn't. I had gained something else. Clarity. I learned that a person can sit beside you every night and still be living a completely separate life. I learned that money doesn't reveal everything about a person. But the way they handle money when they think you aren't watching can reveal a lot. And most importantly, I learned that trusting someone doesn't mean you stop trusting yourself. A year after I left Daniel, I received an invitation to speak at a professional event. The subject was career interruption. Women who had stepped away from work for family. Women who had sacrificed opportunities. Women who were trying to return. I stood on that stage and looked at hundreds of people. I told them my story. Not every detail, not Daniel's name, but enough. I told them that sometimes life convinces us that starting over means going backward. It doesn't. Sometimes starting over means finally choosing yourself. After the speech, a woman approached me. She told me she had been thinking about leaving her job because her husband wanted her to stay home. She said she was afraid. I asked her what she wanted. She said she didn't know anymore. I told her to take some time and find out. Because no relationship should require you to erase yourself. That night, I went home. I opened my front door. The house was quiet. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. I walked into my office. The photograph of my younger self was still above my desk. I looked at her. Then I smiled. She had thought she was giving up everything. She didn't know that one day, she would find herself again. People sometimes ask me what I would have done differently. The obvious answer is that I would have looked at the bank statements sooner. I would have asked more questions. I would have kept working. I would have protected my savings. I would have noticed the warning signs. But if I could go back, there is one thing I would tell the woman sitting at that kitchen table. I would tell her that she wasn't stupid. She wasn't weak. She wasn't unlovable. She simply loved someone who didn't know how to honor that love. And there is an important difference between being betrayed and being a failure. I was betrayed, but I did not fail. Daniel made his choices. I made mine. And eventually, I made the most important one. I chose myself. Today, I still have the bank statement that started everything. I kept it. Not because I want to remember Daniel. I kept it because of what it represents. That piece of paper was the moment I stopped asking, how could he do this to me? And started asking, what am I going to do for myself now? That question changed everything. I returned to my career. I rebuilt my finances. I rebuilt my confidence. I learned to enjoy my own company. And I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could sacrifice for someone else. Because love is supposed to add to your life. It isn't supposed to require you to lose yourself to prove that you're worthy of it. Daniel thought he was taking money from our future. He was. But he was also giving me something he never intended to give me. The courage to build a future without him. And that future turned out to be better than anything I had imagined. So if you're listening to this and you've ever wondered whether you've given too much of yourself to someone you love, remember this. You can love someone deeply and still choose yourself. You can forgive someone and still walk away. You can lose a relationship and still find your life. And sometimes, The moment you think everything has been taken from you is the moment you finally discover what can never be taken away. Yourself. If this story touched you, don't leave without telling me in the comments. Would you have confronted Daniel immediately, or would you have done exactly what Claire did and gathered the evidence first? And if you want more stories about betrayal, sacrifice, family secrets, and the moments that change people's lives forever, subscribe and stay with us. Because sometimes the person you trust the most is the person whose secrets you never thought to question.